Now, the atmosphere is positive unless there are new Israeli obstacles. Now, that's from a senior Hamas official as a delegation is travelling to Egypt to deliver its highly anticipated response to Israel's latest hostage and truce proposal. But as Egypt, Qatar and the US continue to struggle to find common ground between Hamas and Israel, right as Israel continues its offensive in Gaza, still really standing firm and saying it is planning for a ground operation on the southern city of Rafah. And on top of that, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, he is also arriving in Saudi Arabia for separate talks. So let's talk about all of the latest. And our chief foreign editor, Rob Parsons, is with me here on set. Rob, the US saying it believes there is a deal on the table. Do we know anything about this deal there?
Not a great deal of detail, Stuart, but a little bit is out there. And the US is also saying that the onus is on Hamas to make concessions, implying that Hamas has been the greatest obstacle to a deal up until now. Just as a reminder, Hamas's main demands up until this point have been that there should be a full ceasefire, in other words, complete end of hostilities, that the Israeli Defense Forces should withdraw completely from the Gaza Strip, and that North Gazans who were forced out of North Gaza by the fighting should be allowed to return en masse back to the north of Gaza. There does seem to be some sort of shift. What seems to be the makings of a deal is what we see here. In other words, a temporary ceasefire or truce, call it whatever you like. We don't really have any details about how long that would take, including also the release of between 20 and 33 Israeli hostages. Primarily, we're told, the sick and wounded and the elderly. And the release of around about, again, no precise figures, 500 Palestinian prisoners currently held in Israeli prisons. And once that's achieved, then the possibility of moving on to what is called the restoration of sustainable calm in Gaza. Again, precisely what that means we don't know at this stage, but it's being interpreted as a concession on the part of the Israelis. You mentioned now that Hamas said yesterday, talking to AFP, that they had no major issues with the current proposal. But today, we've heard a slightly different story from Hamas, and this has been happening all along through these talks. You hear one thing one day and one thing another, that they're still looking at the detail. So the pressure is on Hamas, the pressure is on Israel for some sort of deal, but we're not there yet.
And at the same time, of course, we've still got this threat, if that's the right word, from Israel of this advance on Rafah. The US continuing to put pressure on Israel to say, stop, don't go there. But how far is the US prepared to go to rein Israel in?
Well, this is the big question. There's no doubt that publicly the United States is putting an immense amount of pressure on Israel to back away from the idea of going into Rafah. And we've just had over this weekend John Kirby, the White House National Security spokesperson, saying they've assured us they won't go into Rafah unless we've had a chance to really share our perspectives and concerns with them. I'm sure the United States has already done that pretty clearly. What they seem to be saying in private is even tougher, by all accounts, that the United States is categorically against Israel going into Rafah because of the implications of that. We've seen 34,000 people killed already in Gaza. If they go into Rafah, where there's a population currently of around 1 million people, that figure could go rocketing up. It would also prevent a lot of the aid that's been getting into the Gaza Strip through Rafah from carrying on, in other words, coming from Egypt. It could lead to an overflow of refugees into Egypt, what the Egyptians are particularly concerned about, and could completely undermine the efforts of the United States to go beyond where we are at the moment and start looking at what happens post-war in Gaza. So the Americans are saying, look, don't do it. For their part, the Israelis are, I think, trying to use the threat of an assault on Rafah to put pressure on Hamas. And we had Israel Katz, the foreign minister, saying again at the weekend, look, Israel's ready to defer the operation on Rafah as long as there is a deal on the hostages. In other words, trying to link the two things. Whether that's going to pay off, we'll start to get a better picture, I think, over the next 24 hours or so.
Well, Rob, I'm going to ask you that question that I know people like you hate being asked. Crystal ball time. What prospects then are there of a deal, do you think?
Well, there's no doubt there are an awful lot of parts that are moving and looking as though they could click into place at the moment. There's a lot of pressure from Egypt because of its particular concern about the knock-on effect of an assault on Rafah. Massive pressure from the United States on Israel, because of the humanitarian costs of what that would involve, but also because of the political costs, both domestically and internationally for the United States if it is to continue supporting Israel. Qatar also has been playing a key part in the mediation. It is showing signs of becoming weary of the whole thing. Antony Blinken is now in Saudi Arabia, as you mentioned. He's going on to Jordan and Israel afterwards. The United States is trying to pull together a package post-Gaza, post the war in Gaza, that would have to include as its starting point an acceptance by Israel that there would have to be some sort of Palestinian force, perhaps backed by Middle Eastern countries, Arab countries in other words, running the administration and the security of Gaza after the war is over. In other words, no role for the Israeli armed forces in Gaza. So there is some sort of hope there, but an awful lot of things have to happen before we get to that point. And as I just mentioned a second ago, Qatar, one of the main mediators, saying it's utterly fed up with the problems being created by both sides, the obstacles being created by both sides to a solution.